What if everything you thought you knew about yourself turned out to be only part of the truth? In this powerful story, we follow Nathan, a young man who has spent most of his life navigating the challenges of foster care and homelessness. One day, a chance encounter with Ethan, a compassionate police officer, changes everything. Ethan is struck by Nathan's uncanny resemblance to someone he loved and lost his late daughter, Emily. But it's the silver pendant around Nathan's neck that sends Ethan's world spinning. Could this troubled teenager hold the key to a mystery that's haunted Ethan for years? As their lives intertwine, buried truths about family, loss, and a corrupt system begin to surface, forcing both Nathan and Ethan to confront their pasts. Through moments of heartbreak and hope, Nathan embarks on a journey of self-discovery, uncovering pieces of a life he never knew he had and forging bonds that will change him forever. Ethan Carter adjusted his grip on the steering wheel as his patrol car cruised down the quiet streets of Ashwood. The golden glow of the setting sun filtered through the autumn leaves, casting dappled patterns on the pavement. It had been a long, uneventful shift in noise complaint here, a broken taillight there. Yet Ethan's mind wasn't on his work. His thoughts were consumed by Emily. 5 years. It had been 5 years since he and Rachel lost their only daughter in a car accident. Time had dulled the sharpness of grief, but had not erased it. The memory of Emily's laughter, her curious questions, and her bright smile lived in every corner of their home. And then there was the necklace. Ethan touched the empty spot on his chest where a matching silver pendant used to rest. He had bought 2 identical pieces, a small guitar pick with intricate engravings, one for himself and one for Emily. When she was buried, Rachel insisted the necklace go with her, a symbol of their unbroken bond. Ethan hadn't argued, though it left him feeling as if a piece of his own soul was 6 feet under with her. The radio crackled, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. He responded absent-mindedly to dispatch, more out of habit than engagement. As he turned on a Maple Avenue, something caught his eye: a teenage boy darting across the road without checking for traffic. Ethan braked hard, his heart jumping at the sudden movement. He flicked on the patrol car's lights and stepped out. The boy froze mid-step, a deer caught in the headlights. "Hey there," Ethan called out, keeping his tone calm. "You know it's dangerous to cross like that." The boy, around 16, shuffled nervously. His shaggy brown hair hung over his eyes, and his oversized hoodie and torn sneakers spoke of hard times. "Sorry," the boy mumbled, his voice barely audible. Ethan's eyes narrowed as something glinted around the boy's neck. A silver pendant. His breath caught. It was the same design as Emily's, identical, down to the etched pattern. "That's an interesting necklace," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. The boy's hand flew to the pendant, clutching it protectively. "It's mine," he said quickly, taking a step back. "Of course," Ethan replied, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Just be careful crossing the street, all right?" The boy nodded and hurried off, his sneakers scuffing against the pavement. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing as he watched the boy disappear down an alley. The image of the necklace burned in his mind. Could it be a coincidence? Or was there something more? Back in his patrol car, Ethan gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles white. His gut told him this wasn't random. He had to know where that necklace came from. The drive home was a blur. As Ethan pulled into the driveway of their modest 2-bedroom house, Rachel met him at the door. Her auburn hair was tied back, and worry flickered in her green eyes. "Long shift?" she asked, sensing his tension. "You could say that," Ethan muttered, setting his hat on the counter. Rachel tilted her head, waiting. Ethan had learned that after 20 years of marriage, she didn't need to press him to talk. "I met a kid today," he said finally, sinking into the chair by the kitchen table. "He was wearing a necklace, the same one we buried with Emily." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. "Are you sure?" Ethan nodded. "It's identical, Rachel. Same design. Same everything. I know what I saw." Rachel sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly. "But how? We bought those custom-made. There were only 2. "That's what I don't understand," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to find him again, figure out who he is and where he got it." Rachel hesitated before reaching across the table to take his hand. "If this is about Emily, it's not just about her. Ethan interrupted. There's something here, Rachel. Something I can't explain. She sighed softly, her expression torn between caution and empathy. If you think this is worth pursuing, then I'll help you. But please, Ethan, be careful. You've been through enough. Ethan nodded, grateful for her support. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the encounter with the boy in his mind. The next morning, Ethan began asking around at local shelters and community centers. The boy's worn clothes and guarded demeanor hinted at homelessness. His search led him to St. Mark's Shelter, a brick building nestled in a quiet part of town. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and faint cooking oil. Volunteers bustled around, handing out trays of food and blankets. Ethan approached the front desk, where a woman in her 50s greeted him warmly. Officer Carter, he introduced himself, showing his badge. I'm looking for someone. A teenager, maybe 16 or 17, with brown hair and a silver necklace. Have you seen him? The woman frowned thoughtfully. That sounds like Nathan. He comes by sometimes, usually in the evenings. Do you know anything about him? Where he's from, or who his family is? She shook her head. Nathan's a quiet one. Keeps to himself. But he's a good kid. Always polite. Ethan thanked her and decided to wait. As the evening wore on, people filtered in and out of the shelter, their faces lined with hardship and resilience. Ethan found himself thinking of Emily again, how she used to volunteer at shelters like this, her heart wide open to those in need. When Nathan finally appeared, Ethan felt a jolt of recognition. The boy shuffled in hesitantly, his hood pulled low over his face. Ethan approached him gently. Nathan, he said, his voice calm. Nathan froze, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. I just want to talk, Ethan continued. About your necklace. Nathan's hand instinctively went to the pendant. Why? Because it's important, Ethan said, his tone earnest. It belonged to someone I loved very much, and I need to know where you got it. Nathan hesitated, his posture defensive. A lady gave it to me years ago, he mumbled. Ethan's heart raced. Who? Do you remember her name? Nathan shrugged. Her name was Agnes. She said it was special, that it would keep me safe. Ethan nodded slowly. Do you know where I can find her? Nathan glanced toward the door, his body tense. I don't know. She moved around a lot. Let me help you, Ethan said, his voice softening. You shouldn't have to figure this out on your own. Nathan stared at him for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. As Ethan drove Nathan to a nearby diner for a meal, he couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change forever. Something about this boy, this moment, felt like a thread leading him to answers he hadn't even dared to hope for. The diner was quiet, the hum of an old jukebox blending with the clatter of plates and muffled conversations. Nathan sat across from Ethan in a corner booth, his shoulders hunched and his eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. The teenager's unease was palpable, but Ethan stayed calm, giving him space to settle. You can order whatever you want, Ethan said gently, sliding a menu across the table. Nathan hesitated, his fingers hovering over the laminated paper. I'm fine, he muttered, though his hollow cheeks and the way he eyed the plates passing by told another story. Ethan leaned back, his voice soft but firm. You don't have to act tough with me, Nathan. Let me get you something. Reluctantly, Nathan nodded. Burger and fries, I guess, and a soda. The waitress took their order, her smile kind but curious as she glanced between the clean-cut officer and the scruffy teenager. Nathan fidgeted with the silver pendant around his neck, his fingers tracing its edges like a lifeline. That necklace, Ethan began, breaking the silence. You said a woman named Agnes gave it to you. Do you remember anything else about her? Nathan shrugged, his eyes fixed on the table. She was nice. Older. She found me after the fire. Ethan's brow furrowed. What fire? Nathan hesitated, his jaw tightening. It was a long time ago. I don't remember much. Just smoke, people yelling, and Agnes pulling me out. She said I was lucky to be alive. Ethan's mind raced. Could the fire be connected to Emily somehow? Or was it just another piece of Nathan's fragmented past? He leaned forward, keeping his tone steady. Do you know what happened to your family after that? Nathan's lips pressed into a thin line. There wasn't a family. I bounced around foster homes after the fire. Nobody wanted to keep me. Ethan's chest tightened at the bitterness in the boy's voice. He couldn't imagine growing up without a family, without the love and stability Emily had always known. The waitress returned with their food, setting the plates down with a cheerful enjoy. Nathan's resolve cracked as the smell of the burger hit him. He grabbed it with both hands and took a huge bite, his hunger overriding his earlier reluctance. Ethan watched in silence, feeling a mix of pity and admiration. Nathan had clearly been through more than any teenager should, yet he'd survived. He wasn't just tough, he was resilient. You know, Ethan said after a moment, Emily, my daughter, used to volunteer at shelters like St. Mark's. She had a soft spot for helping people. Nathan glanced up, chewing slowly. She sounds nice. She was, Ethan said, his voice heavy with emotion. She died in an accident 5 years ago. Nathan's chewing slowed, and he swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Ethan nodded. She had a necklace just like yours. That's why I stopped you. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it. Nathan fingered the pendant again, his expression guarded. Agnes gave it to me when I was little. She said it was special, but she never said why. Ethan took a deep breath, his police instincts kicking in. Nathan, I need your help to figure this out. If there's a connection between you and Emily, I want to know. I don't want to pressure you, but will you let me look into your past? Maybe we can find Agnes and get some answers. Nathan set the burger down, his shoulders stiffening. Why do you care? I'm just some kid. Ethan's voice softened. Because I've lost too much already. And if there's even a chance you're connected to Emily, I owe it to her and to you to find out the truth. Nathan studied him, his eyes searching Ethan's face for signs of deceit. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but no promises. People don't usually stick around when things get messy. Ethan felt a pang of sorrow at Nathan's words. I'm not going anywhere, Nathan. That night, Ethan returned home to Rachel, his mind buzzing with everything Nathan had told him. Rachel was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through a box of old photos. How did it go? She asked, looking up as Ethan walked in. He dropped his keys on the counter and sank into a chair. His name's Nathan Reed. He's been on his own for years. And Rachel, he mentioned a fire, said a woman named Agnes saved him as a baby and gave him the necklace. Rachel's eyes widened. Agnes? That's the name of Emily's daycare teacher, the one who always wore that red cardigan. Ethan's breath caught. You're right. I didn't even think of that. Rachel sifted through the photos until she found one of Emily as a toddler, standing next to a middle-aged woman with a warm smile. This is Agnes. Ethan stared at the photo, his heart pounding. I have to find her. She might know something about Nathan's past. Rachel placed a hand on his arm. Ethan, are you sure about this? What if it leads to more heartache? He looked at her, his resolve unwavering. If there's even a chance that Nathan is connected to Emily, I have to follow it. I can't let this go, Rachel. Rachel nodded, her expression softening. Then we'll figure it out together. The next morning, Ethan started making calls, tracking down Agnes through old records and contacts. His search eventually led him to a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, where Agnes now lived in a small, tidy bungalow. When she opened the door, her face lit up with recognition. Officer Carter, what a surprise. Agnes, Ethan said, his voice calm but urgent. I need your help. It's about a boy named Nathan Reed and a necklace you might have given him. Agnes's smile faltered, and she ushered him inside. The living room smelled of lavender and was filled with framed photos of children she had cared for over the years. I remember Nathan, she said, sitting down. I found him after the fire at Sunshine Group Home. He was just a baby, crying in the rubble. I took him in for a few days until the authorities came. That necklace, I gave it to him because it was the only thing he had when I found him. Ethan's pulse quickened. Do you know anything else about him? His family? Agnes shook her head. I wish I did. The records from the home were destroyed in the fire. But he wasn't the only baby I found that night. There was another child, but he didn't survive. Ethan's heart pounded as he pieced together her words. Could Nathan have been Emily's twin, separated by tragedy and circumstance? I need to find out the truth, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. Agnes reached out and squeezed his hand. Then do it, Officer Carter. That boy deserves answers. Ethan left her house feeling equal parts determined and overwhelmed. Nathan's story was unfolding piece by piece, but the picture was still incomplete. He knew one thing for certain: he was closer than ever to uncovering a truth that could change both their lives forever. Nathan sat on the edge of a park bench, his knees pulled to his chest, and the silver pendant clenched tightly in his hand. The cool morning air bit at his cheeks as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the barren trees. Sleep had eluded him the night before. Too many questions swirled in his mind, each one more unsettling than the last. Who was Emily? How was he connected to this officer who seemed so determined to help him? And why did it feel like everything he thought he knew about his life was crumbling beneath him? Across town, Ethan Carter sat at the kitchen table with Rachel, staring at the DNA test kit in front of him. Agnes's words echoed in his mind. "I found him after the fire." Could Nathan really be Emily's twin, separated at birth under tragic circumstances? Or was this simply a coincidence, a desperate hope for connection born out of grief? Rachel poured herself another cup of coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she set the mug down. "Ethan," she began softly, "are you sure this is the right thing to do? What if Nathan doesn't want to know the truth? What if it's too much for him?" Ethan ran a hand through his graying hair. "I don't know, Rachel, but he deserves the chance to know where he came from. And if there's even a chance he's connected to Emily, we owe it to him and to her to find out." Rachel nodded, her green eyes filled with equal parts hope and worry. "Then let's do it together." Later that afternoon, Ethan parked his patrol car outside St. Mark's shelter, scanning the small crowd gathered near the entrance. Nathan wasn't there. Anxiety prickled at Ethan's chest as he stepped out of the car and approached the shelter staff. "Have you seen Nathan today?" he asked a volunteer, his voice tight. The volunteer shook her head. "Not since yesterday. He didn't come by for breakfast this morning, but that's not unusual. He keeps to himself." Ethan thanked her and began driving around town, checking parks, alleys, and other places where the city's homeless youth often gathered. As the hours ticked by, frustration built in his chest. He didn't want to push Nathan too hard, but time felt urgent. The closer he got to the truth, the more he feared it might slip through his fingers. Nathan wandered through the streets of Ashwood, his stomach growling and his hoodie doing little to keep the cold at bay. He had spent the night in the back corner of an old warehouse, using a pile of discarded newspapers as a makeshift blanket. It wasn't the first time he'd slept rough, and he doubted it would be the last. A voice in his mind urged him to trust Ethan, to let the officer help him uncover the mysteries of his past. But another part of him, the part hardened by years of rejection and loneliness, screamed to run. People didn't stick around for Nathan Reed. He had learned that lesson the hard way. As he passed a small diner, the smell of warm food wafted through the air, making his stomach ache. He stopped and peered through the window, watching families share meals and laugh together. A pang of longing cut through him, sharper than the cold. "Nathan," a voice called from behind him. Startled, Nathan turned to see Ethan approaching, his expression a mix of relief and determination. "I've been looking for you," Ethan said, stopping a few feet away to avoid spooking him. "Are you all right?" Nathan shrugged, his eyes darting to the ground. "I'm fine." Ethan sighed. "You don't have to keep pretending, Nathan. I know it's not easy out here. Let me help." "I don't need your help," Nathan snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. "You don't have to do this alone," Ethan said, his tone gentle. "I talked to Agnes. She told me about the fire and how she found you. And she mentioned there might have been another child, a baby who didn't make it." Nathan stiffened, his grip tightening on the pendant. "What does that have to do with me?" "I think there's a chance you weren't alone that night," Ethan said carefully. "You might have had a twin, someone who didn't survive, or so everyone thought." Nathan's heart raced as he stared at Ethan, the words hitting him like a freight train. "A twin? Are you saying I had a brother or something?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "A sister. My daughter, Emily." Nathan took a step back, shaking his head. "No, that's crazy. That's not possible. I know it's a lot to take in," Ethan said. "But there's a way to know for sure. A DNA test. It's quick, and it could give us answers." Nathan's mind swirled with doubt and fear. "A sister?" A family? It sounded like something out of a storybook, not his life. But deep down, a tiny spark of hope flickered, hope that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he'd always believed. Why would you care if I'm related to her? Nathan asked, his voice raw. She's gone, right? So, what does it matter? Ethan's voice softened. It matters because you matter, Nathan. And because if Emily were here, she'd want you to know the truth. She'd want you to have the chance to be part of something bigger than the life you've had. Nathan stared at the ground, his chest tightening. I don't know. I don't know if I can do this. You don't have to decide right now, Ethan said. But think about it. You deserve to know where you come from. And if you're willing to let me help, I promise I'll be there every step of the way. For a long moment, Nathan said nothing. Then reluctantly he nodded. Okay, I'll think about it. That evening, Nathan sat on the steps of St. Mark's shelter, turning the pendant over in his hands. The cold metal felt heavy, like the weight of the questions he couldn't escape. He thought about Ethan's words, about the possibility of having a family, of belonging somewhere. When he finally walked inside, Ethan was waiting. The officer's face lit up with relief when he saw Nathan approach. I'll do it, Nathan said quietly, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. I'll take the test. Ethan smiled, a mixture of gratitude and hope shining in his eyes. Thank you, Nathan. You're doing the right thing. As they left the shelter together, Nathan felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the faintest glimmer of hope. The sterile smell of antiseptic hung in the air as Nathan sat stiffly in a waiting room chair. The clinic was quiet, save for the distant sound of a phone ringing at the reception desk. Across from him, Ethan sat with his hands clasped tightly, his gaze fixed on a poster about healthy living. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. How long is this going to take? Ethan turned to him, his voice calm. The test itself? Just a few minutes. The results might take a week or two. Nathan nodded, though his unease was clear. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the possibility that Ethan was right or that he was wrong. A twin? A family? It all felt too surreal, like something that could crumble if he dared to believe it. When the nurse called his name, Nathan hesitated before standing. He glanced at Ethan, who offered a reassuring nod. Together, they followed the nurse to a small exam room where she explained the process. It's just a quick swab of the inside of your cheek, she said, holding up the sterile swab with a practiced smile. Nathan sat down in the chair, his body tense. He closed his eyes as the nurse swirled the swab inside his mouth, then repeated the process for Ethan. That's it, the nurse said, sealing the samples in a labeled envelope. You'll get a call when the results are ready. As they left the clinic, the silence between Nathan and Ethan felt heavier than ever. Nathan stuffed his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the sidewalk. Do you want to grab something to eat? Ethan asked gently. Nathan shook his head. I'm not hungry. Ethan respected his silence, knowing the boy needed time to process. They drove back to St. Mark's shelter in quiet companionship, the air between them filled with unspoken questions. That night, Nathan lay awake on a thin cot at the shelter, the silver pendant dangling from his fingers. He stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying everything Ethan had said about Emily. Could he really have had a sister? The idea filled him with equal parts longing and fear. What if the test came back positive? Did that mean he was supposed to fit into a family he didn't know, to be someone he wasn't sure he could be? He squeezed the pendant tightly, the cool metal grounding him. Agnes had said it was special, but she'd never explained why. It was the only thing he had from his past, the only link to a life he couldn't remember. Across town, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with Rachel, the DNA test weighing heavily on his mind. He agreed to do it, Ethan said, breaking the long silence. Rachel looked up from her tea, her expression soft. That's a big step for him. Ethan nodded. I just hope I'm not pushing him too hard. He's been through so much already. Rachel reached across the table, resting her hand on his. If he's anything like Emily, he's stronger than you think. The mention of Emily brought a bittersweet ache to Ethan's chest. I see so much of her in him, Rachel. The way he fiddles with that necklace, the way he looks at the world like he's carrying the weight of it. It's like having a piece of her back, but different. Rachel's voice was gentle. Whether or not he's her twin, Nathan deserves to know he matters. That's what you're giving him, Ethan. A chance to belong. Ethan nodded, though his thoughts were tangled. The necklace, the fire, Agnes, each thread of Nathan's story felt like it was leading them closer to something life-changing. A few days later, Ethan returned to Agnes's bungalow, determined to learn more about the night of the fire. Agnes welcomed him with her usual warm smile and invited him into the cozy living room. "I've been thinking about that boy," Agnes said, handing Ethan a cup of tea. "Nathan. He's grown into such a fine young man." "He has," Ethan agreed, his gratitude evident. "But I need to know more about what happened the night you found him. Anything you can remember could help." Agnes sat down in her armchair, her expression thoughtful. "It was chaos, Ethan. The fire had already consumed most of the group home by the time I got there. I heard crying, just faint cries coming from a pile of rubble. That's where I found him." Her voice grew softer. "He was so small, barely a year old. And there was something else." Ethan leaned forward. "What?" "I found him holding onto that necklace," Agnes said. "It was strange, almost as if it had been placed there intentionally. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now—" Ethan's heart raced. "Do you remember anything else? Any signs of another child?" Agnes hesitated, her hands wringing in her lap. There were rumors after the fire about missing records, about children being separated. But nothing was ever proven. "All I know is Nathan was alone when I found him." Ethan thanked her and left, his mind racing with possibilities. If the necklace had been intentionally placed, could it have been a message? A clue? The next time Ethan visited Nathan, the boy was sitting on the shelter steps, absently strumming an old guitar someone had donated. His fingers moved clumsily over the strings, but the melody was sweet and hesitant, like a whisper of hope. "That's nice," Ethan said, sitting down beside him. Nathan shrugged. "Something I heard once. It helps me think." Ethan nodded, letting the moment settle before speaking. "Agnes told me something interesting. She said you were holding the necklace when she found you." Nathan frowned, his fingers stilling on the guitar. So, Ethan continued carefully, "it might have been left with you for a reason. Maybe someone wanted you to have it, someone who cared about you." Nathan stared at the ground, his voice barely audible. "I don't even know who that would be." Ethan's tone softened. "We'll find out, Nathan. Together." For the first time, Nathan looked at Ethan and saw not just a cop, but someone who genuinely cared. Someone who wasn't going to walk away when things got hard. "Okay," Nathan said quietly. "Let's see where this goes." That night, Ethan and Rachel sat together, the weight of the journey ahead heavy but hopeful. Across town, Nathan lay on his cot, the guitar beside him and the silver pendant resting against his chest. Somewhere deep inside, the flicker of hope grew stronger. Nathan paced back and forth outside St. Mark's shelter, his sneakers scuffing against the cracked pavement. A week had passed since the DNA test, and every passing day felt like an eternity. He didn't know what scared him more, the results confirming a connection to Ethan's daughter or the possibility of being left with more questions and no answers. The silver pendant bounced against his chest as he moved, its weight both a comfort and a burden. He hadn't taken it off since Ethan started asking questions. "Waiting won't make it faster," said a voice behind him. Nathan turned to see Ethan standing there, hands in his jacket pockets, a calm presence against Nathan's frayed nerves. Nathan shrugged, his voice tinged with impatience. "I just want to know." Ethan nodded. "So do I. But no matter what happens, you're not alone in this." Nathan's jaw tightened as he looked away, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to believe Ethan, but trust didn't come easily after years of people letting him down. 2 days later, the call came. Ethan stood in his kitchen, the phone pressed to his ear as he listened to the lab technician on the other end. His heart pounded as the results were read aloud, the words hitting him with both relief and shock. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. When he hung up, Rachel looked at him expectantly, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Well," Ethan exhaled slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "It's a match, Rachel. Nathan is Emily's twin." Rachel's hands flew to her mouth, her green eyes filling with tears. "Oh my God!" "Ethan, Are you sure? He nodded, his throat tightening. 99.9% sure. Rachel stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. What are we going to tell him? The truth, Ethan said. He deserves to know. Later that afternoon, Ethan found Nathan sitting on a bench in the park, strumming the same old guitar. The melody was soft and uncertain, much like Nathan himself. Ethan approached cautiously, taking a seat beside him. Nathan. Nathan glanced up, his fingers pausing on the strings. What's up? Ethan took a deep breath. I got the results. Nathan's body tensed, his hand gripping the neck of the guitar. And you're Emily's twin, Ethan said simply, his voice filled with a mix of emotion. Nathan blinked, the words hanging in the air like an unanswered question. What? What does that even mean? It means you have a sister, Ethan said, his voice steady but gentle. A twin. You're part of our family. Nathan stared at the ground, his mind reeling. He had always wondered about his past, but he never imagined it could lead to something like this. A sister? A family? It felt too big to process. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. I know it's a lot, Nathan. Take your time. But I want you to know you're not alone anymore. Nathan looked up, his voice cracking. I don't know how to do this, Ethan. I don't know how to be family. You don't have to figure it out all at once, Ethan said. We'll take it one step at a time. Together. That evening, Ethan brought Nathan home for dinner. Rachel greeted them at the door, her expression a mix of warmth and nervousness. Hi, Nathan, she said softly, her voice kind. Nathan nodded awkwardly. The house was cozy and filled with the smell of Rachel's cooking. As Nathan stepped inside, he noticed pictures on the walls, photos of Emily at different ages, her bright smile lighting up each frame. That's her, isn't it? Nathan asked, his voice quiet as he pointed to one of the pictures. Rachel nodded, her voice tinged with emotion. That's Emily. Nathan stared at the photo, his chest tightening. She looked so much like him. The same eyes, the same nose, even the same slightly crooked smile. It was like looking at a reflection from a life he'd never known. During dinner, the conversation flowed cautiously at first, but Rachel's warmth soon eased the tension. She asked Nathan about his favorite foods, his music, and the places he'd been. Ethan shared stories about Emily, how she loved baking, how she used to leave her shoes in the middle of the hallway, and how she would hum off-key when she was nervous. Nathan listened intently, soaking up every detail about the sister he never knew. After dinner, Rachel brought out a box of Emily's belongings. Inside were photos, journals, and a few of her favorite things. Nathan hesitated before reaching for a small journal with a purple cover. You can look through it, Rachel said gently. It's yours now if you want it. Nathan opened the journal, his fingers brushing the handwritten pages. Emily's words leapt off the paper, filled with dreams, jokes, and sketches. For the first time, Nathan felt a connection to her that went beyond the necklace. As the night wound down, Ethan walked Nathan back to St. Mark's shelter. The streets were quiet, the hum of street lights filling the silence between them. Thank you, Nathan said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stopped, looking at him. For what? For not giving up on me, Nathan said, his eyes meeting Ethan's. Ethan smiled, his voice steady. Your family, Nathan. That's what family does. Nathan nodded, the weight of the word family settling on his shoulders. It was still new, still strange, but for the first time in his life, he felt like it might be something real. That night, as Nathan lay on his cot, he held Emily's journal in one hand and the silver pendant in the other. The pieces of his past were starting to come together, and with them, a fragile but growing hope for the future. The morning sunlight filtered through the small windows of St. Mark's shelter as Nathan woke, clutching Emily's journal like a lifeline. He hadn't slept much. The words in her handwriting had been alive in his mind all night, lines about her dreams, her thoughts, and little moments of happiness that felt both foreign and familiar. Nathan sat up slowly, the thin blanket falling away from his shoulders. His fingers grazed the silver pendant hanging from his neck, the same pendant that had connected him to a sister he never knew existed. The truth weighed on him heavily, yet for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a burden he had to carry alone. At the Carter household, Ethan and Rachel prepared for another meeting with Nathan. Ethan stood by the kitchen counter, scrolling through old case files on his laptop. The fire that had supposedly destroyed Sunshine Group Home was still officially listed as accidental, but something about it didn't sit right with him. Missing records, unaccounted children, it felt like there were pieces of the puzzle deliberately hidden. Rachel placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of him and leaned against the counter. "You're quiet this morning," she observed. Ethan rubbed his temples. "I've been going through everything I can find on Sunshine Group Home and the fire. Something about it doesn't add up. If Nathan was left there with a necklace, someone must have known who he was." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think it was intentional? That someone wanted him to disappear?" Ethan sighed. "It's possible, but I need more than a hunch. I'm going to make a few calls today, see if I can dig up anything." Rachel touched his arm. "Whatever you find, Ethan, remember this isn't just about answers. Nathan needs more than facts. He needs us." Ethan looked up at her, his resolve softening. "I know. I just want to give him the whole truth, for his sake and Emily's." When Nathan arrived that afternoon, Rachel greeted him with a warm smile. She had prepared sandwiches and set out a pitcher of lemonade on the kitchen table. "Sit down, Nathan," she said, motioning to the table. "You must be hungry." Nathan hesitated before pulling out a chair. He was still getting used to the kindness, the warmth. It felt strange, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit yet. As they ate, Rachel asked Nathan about his music. He mentioned the guitar he had been practicing on, and her eyes lit up. "Emily loved music too," Rachel said, her voice soft. "She taught herself to play guitar. There's an old acoustic one upstairs that belonged to her. Maybe you'd like to see it later?" Nathan nodded, though the idea of playing Emily's guitar made his stomach twist. It felt like stepping into a space that didn't belong to him. After lunch, Ethan joined them in the living room, a serious expression on his face. "Nathan," he began, "I've been looking into the fire at Sunshine Group Home. I think there might be more to the story than we know." Nathan stiffened, the mention of the fire bringing back flashes of smoke and chaos. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned forward, his tone measured. "There are gaps in the records, missing files, children who were never accounted for. And the necklace, it's not something a baby would have by accident. Someone left it with you. Someone who wanted you to have it." Nathan's chest tightened as the weight of Ethan's words sank in. "So, you think someone knew who I was?" "It's possible," Ethan said. "And if that's true, then whoever left you at Sunshine might have been trying to protect you." Nathan looked down at the pendant, his fingers brushing its etched surface. "Why didn't they come back for me?" Ethan's voice softened. "I don't know, Nathan, but I want to find out. And if you're willing, I think we can get some answers." That evening, Rachel took Nathan upstairs to Emily's old room. It had been carefully preserved, the walls painted a soft lavender, and the shelves lined with trophies, books, and trinkets. In the corner stood an acoustic guitar, its honey-colored wood gleaming in the soft light. Nathan approached it slowly, his heart pounding. He picked it up, running his fingers along the smooth surface. It felt familiar, like something he had been searching for without knowing it. "She used to sit by that window and play for hours," Rachel said, her voice tinged with emotion. "Sometimes, she'd make up songs about her day. They were terrible," she added with a laugh, "but she loved every second of it." Nathan smiled faintly, his grip tightening on the guitar. He sat down on the edge of the bed and strummed a chord, the sound rich and full. His fingers moved clumsily at first, but as he played, the notes began to flow more naturally. Rachel watched with tears in her eyes, seeing echoes of her daughter in the boy sitting before her. Meanwhile, Ethan made a breakthrough in his investigation. An old contact at the local records office had unearthed a file from Sunshine Group Home, a list of children who had been placed there shortly before the fire. Among the names was baby Anne, listed as being rescued from the wreckage. But there was another name that caught Ethan's eye, baby E, marked as deceased. His heart pounded as he studied the file. The initials couldn't be a coincidence. Emily and Nathan, twins separated by tragedy. But why? And who had made the decision to separate them? Ethan's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Rachel. "You need to hear this," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Ethan returned home to find Nathan playing Emily's guitar. The melody was simple but haunting, filling the house with a sense of connection and loss. When Nathan finished, he looked up at Ethan, his expression unreadable. "Did you find something?" Ethan nodded, his voice steady. "I did, and I think it's time we uncovered the rest of the story. Together." As the family sat together in the living room that night, the bond between them grew stronger. They didn't have all the answers yet, but they had each other. And for Nathan, that was a start. Ethan Carter sat at his desk, the dim glow of a desk lamp illuminating the stack of papers in front of him. His fingers tapped the edge of the file labeled Sunshine Group Home Fire. Each page he read deepened the pit in his stomach. Baby N and Baby E, Nathan and Emily. The records all but confirmed that Nathan had been placed at Sunshine with Emily before the fire, yet only Nathan had been marked as a survivor. But why? And why had the agency overseeing the home deliberately obscured those records? Ethan's instincts told him that this wasn't just a tragic accident. Someone had made a calculated decision to separate the twins. Rachel appeared in the doorway, her expression soft. "You've been at this for hours, Ethan. Come to bed." "I'm close to something, Rachel," Ethan replied, his voice heavy with determination. "These kids, they were used. There's more to this than the fire. Someone wanted those records erased." Rachel stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever you find, just remember, Nathan doesn't need every answer right now. He needs you. He needs us." Ethan nodded, squeezing her hand. "I know, but if there's a chance to bring him closure, to give him the truth, I have to try." The next morning, Ethan shared what he'd found with Nathan. The boy sat at the kitchen table, his expression guarded but curious as Ethan laid out the documents. "This is the placement record for Sunshine Group Home," Ethan explained, pointing to the highlighted names. "Baby N is you. Baby E, that's Emily." Nathan stared at the page, his jaw tightening. "So, we were there together, but she didn't make it?" Ethan hesitated. "That's what the records say, but I don't think that's the whole story. Someone went to great lengths to separate you and cover it up." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "Why would anyone do that? We were just kids." "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted, "but I've been digging into the agency that ran Sunshine. They were tied to illegal adoptions and falsified records. It's possible they separated you to make money." Nathan's stomach churned. "So, they just sold her off? Like she was nothing?" Rachel sat down beside him, her voice gentle. "Nathan, you were never nothing. Emily wasn't either. Someone wanted to protect you, even if they couldn't stop what happened." Nathan looked away, his throat tight. The weight of the past was pressing down on him, threatening to suffocate the fragile hope he'd started to feel. Determined to learn more, Ethan reached out to Maggie Davis, a local investigative journalist known for exposing corruption. He shared what he had uncovered, and Maggie agreed to help. "This agency you're looking into," Maggie said as they sat in her office, papers spread across her desk. "They've been under suspicion for years, but no one's ever been able to prove anything. If they were involved in separating twins, they likely destroyed most of the evidence." "Someone has to remember something," Ethan said. "Former employees, foster parents, someone." Maggie leaned back in her chair, considering. "There's one person who might know. Margaret Long. She worked as a records keeper for the agency before the fire. She left under suspicious circumstances, but kept copies of some documents. If anyone has answers, it's her." Ethan left Maggie's office with a renewed sense of purpose. He tracked down Margaret's address, a small ranch house on the outskirts of town, and drove there that afternoon. Margaret Long was in her 70s, her frail frame belying the sharpness in her eyes. She invited Ethan inside, her movements slow but deliberate. "You're here about Sunshine," she said, settling into a worn armchair. Ethan nodded, pulling out the documents he'd brought. "I think the agency was involved in separating twins and falsifying records. I need to know what happened to my daughter, what happened to Emily." Margaret's expression softened. "I remember the Carter twins, Emily and Nathan. Sweet babies. Their file came across my desk just before the fire." Ethan leaned forward. "What do you remember about their placement?" Margaret sighed, her voice heavy. "The agency was under pressure to place as many children as possible, no matter the cost. Twins were especially valuable. Families would pay a premium for one baby, and the other would be marked as stillborn or abandoned. It was cruel, but it made money. Ethan's jaw tightened. So, Emily was sold off? Margaret shook her head. No, Emily was marked as deceased, but I think someone saved her. A name kept appearing in the records: Agnes. She was known for bending the rules to protect children. If anyone kept Emily safe, it was her. Ethan's mind raced. Agnes had found Nathan, but could she have also saved Emily? He needed to confront her again, to fill in the missing pieces. Back at home, Ethan shared what he'd learned with Rachel and Nathan. The boys' reaction was a mix of anger and despair. So, they just decided my life for me? Nathan said, pacing the living room. Who gets to do that? Who decides who lives and who gets thrown away? Ethan stood, his voice steady. No one had the right to do that to you, Nathan. But we're going to make this right. I promise you. Rachel reached out, pulling Nathan into a hug. You're here now, Nathan. And no matter what we find, you're part of this family. You always will be. The next day, Ethan returned to Agnes's bungalow. The elderly woman opened the door with a warm smile, but it faltered when she saw the determination in Ethan's eyes. Agnes, he began, stepping inside. I need to know the truth. Did you save both Nathan and Emily from the fire? Agnes's hands trembled as she sank into a chair. Her eyes filled with tears. I tried, she whispered. I tried to save them both. What happened? Ethan pressed, his voice soft but firm. Agnes took a shaky breath. I found Nathan first, crying in the rubble. I thought I could go back for Emily, but the flames, they were too strong. I couldn't reach her. Ethan's heart broke as he imagined the scene. You did everything you could, he said gently. Agnes looked up, her voice quivering. I couldn't save her, Ethan, but I saved him, and I made sure he had something to hold on to that necklace. A piece of her, so he'd never forget. Tears blurred Ethan's vision as he realized the depth of her sacrifice. That night, as Nathan sat on the Carter's porch, strumming Emily's guitar, Ethan joined him. You were never thrown away, Ethan said, sitting beside him. Agnes made sure of that. She gave you a chance, Nathan. And so did Emily, in her own way. Nathan's fingers stilled on the strings, and he looked at Ethan, his voice barely above a whisper. I just want to make her proud. You already have, Ethan replied, his voice filled with emotion. For the first time, Nathan allowed himself to believe it might be true. Nathan sat on the Carter's porch, the crisp evening air swirling around him. Emily's guitar rested across his lap, its honey-colored wood gleaming under the porch light. His fingers absent-mindedly plucked the strings, weaving a hesitant melody. The weight of Agnes's confession hung heavy in his chest. She had saved him, but Emily's life had been cut short before they had a chance to know each other. Nathan closed his eyes, the sound of the guitar filling the silence. Every note felt like a bridge to a sister he had never known. Inside the house, Ethan and Rachel sat at the kitchen table, poring over documents Ethan had gathered with Maggie's help. The more they uncovered about the adoption agency, the clearer it became that Sunshine Group Home was a piece of a much larger puzzle. They falsified records, Ethan said, pointing to a highlighted section of an old report. They marked children as deceased when they weren't. Margaret's testimony lines up perfectly with what we're seeing here. Rachel nodded, her brow furrowed. And they targeted twins because they could charge more by placing them separately. It's disgusting. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. It's not just disgusting, it's criminal. These people destroyed lives, Rachel. Nathan's and Emily's are just two of many. Rachel reached across the table, her hand covering his. But we're getting closer, Ethan. We can do something about this. The next day, Ethan and Maggie met with Margaret Long again. This time, the elderly woman handed over a worn cardboard box filled with documents she had secretly kept over the years. I've been waiting for someone to do the right thing, Margaret said, her voice trembling but resolute. These papers show everything: the falsified records, the payments, even the names of the people who ran the operation. Ethan and Maggie carefully sifted through the contents. Among the papers was a ledger detailing payment made by adoptive families, with amounts far beyond typical adoption fees. Maggie tapped her pen against the ledger. This matches what I've been piecing together. The agency used shell companies to launder the money. These records might be enough to bring them down. Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. It's time to take this to the authorities. Back at home, Ethan sat Nathan down in the living room. The boy's expression was guarded, his fingers tracing the edge of the silver pendant. I need to tell you something, Ethan began, his voice steady. We've uncovered enough evidence to go after the people who ran the agency. They're responsible for separating you and Emily, for falsifying records, and for hurting so many families. Nathan's grip on the pendant tightened. So, they just get away with it? After everything they did? Ethan shook his head. Not this time. We're building a case against them, and Margaret's testimony is going to be crucial. But I want you to know you're not just a victim in all of this, Nathan. You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for. Nathan looked away, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily didn't get a chance to be strong. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. But you can honor her by living a life she would have been proud of, by helping us fight for the truth. Nathan nodded slowly, his resolve hardening. The following week, Ethan, Maggie, and Margaret presented their findings to the district attorney. Armed with the ledger, Margaret's testimony, and corroborating evidence from old adoption records, the DA agreed to pursue charges against the individuals who had profited from the agency's corruption. These people built an empire on stolen childhoods, the DA said, flipping through the files. We'll make sure they answer for it. As the investigation gained momentum, Nathan watched from the sidelines, a mix of anger and hope swirling inside him. For years, he had felt invisible, just another face in the system. Now, for the first time, his story mattered. One evening, Nathan joined Ethan and Rachel for dinner. The conversation was light, filled with Rachel's laughter and Ethan's dry humor. It felt almost normal. After dinner, Rachel handed Nathan a photo album. I've been putting this together, she said, her voice soft. Nathan opened the album to find pictures of Emily, snapshots of her life that he had never seen. There were photos of her as a toddler, covered in finger paint, as a teenager holding a baseball bat, and as a young woman, her smile bright and full of life. Nathan traced his fingers over the images, his chest tightening. She would have loved you, Rachel said, tears shining in her eyes. Nathan swallowed hard, his voice thick. I wish I could have known her. Rachel placed a hand on his. In a way, you do. You're part of her, Nathan, and she's part of you. The next morning, Nathan woke early. He grabbed Emily's guitar and headed to the park. Sitting on a bench, he began to play, the melody soft and tentative at first, but growing stronger with each note. Passers-by slowed to listen, their faces reflecting the emotion in Nathan's music. For Nathan, the song was more than a melody, it was a bridge to Emily, a way of keeping her alive in the only way he knew how. When he finished, an elderly man sitting nearby clapped softly. Beautiful song, he said. Nathan nodded, his voice quiet. Thanks. The man smiled kindly. You've got a gift, son. Don't let it go to waste. Nathan watched him leave, the man's words lingering in his mind. That evening, Ethan found Nathan on the porch again, strumming the guitar. You sounded great today, Ethan said, sitting beside him. Nathan glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You heard me? Ethan nodded. I did. And so, would Emily, if she were here? She'd be proud, Nathan. Nathan looked down at the guitar, his voice steady. I think I'm ready to start over, to figure out who I am. Not just Emily's brother or some kid in the system. Me. Ethan smiled, his voice filled with warmth. You've already started, Nathan, and we'll be here for every step of the way. For the first time, Nathan felt a flicker of hope that he could belong not just to a family, but to himself. The courthouse buzzed with quiet tension as Ethan and Nathan stepped through the heavy double doors. The hallways were lined with reporters, victims, and onlookers, all drawn to the trial of the adoption agency officials who had profited from tearing families apart. Nathan's heart pounded as he clutched the strap of his backpack, feeling small under the weight of so many eyes. Ethan placed a steady hand on his shoulder. You're not alone, Nathan. We're in this together. Nathan nodded, swallowing hard. The idea of testifying had terrified him, but Ethan had reassured him over and over. Telling the truth wasn't just about justice, it was about taking control of a story that had been stolen from him for so long. Inside the courtroom, Ethan, Rachel, and Nathan sat in the front row. Margaret Long was already at the witness stand, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her voice, though shaky at times, was firm as she recounted her years working at Sunshine Group Home and the illegal practices she had witnessed. The agency falsified records to separate siblings, Margaret said, her voice filled with quiet anger. Twins were particularly profitable because they could charge higher fees for separate placements. A collective murmur swept through the courtroom. Nathan clenched his fists, anger bubbling in his chest. Hearing the cold, calculated way the agency had treated children like him, and Emily made his stomach turn. The defense lawyer tried to discredit Margaret's testimony, but her answers were clear and unwavering. By the time she stepped down, the prosecution had painted a damning picture of the agency's corruption. When it was Nathan's turn to testify, his legs felt like lead as he approached the stand. The judge, a kind-eyed woman with gray hair, offered him a reassuring nod as he was sworn in. Ethan's encouraging smile from the front row steadied him, and Nathan took a deep breath before beginning. "I don't remember much about Sunshine," Nathan admitted. "I was just a baby, but I know what it's like to grow up not knowing who you are or where you come from." He glanced at the jury, his voice growing stronger. "They took that away from me, from Emily. They separated us, and because of that I never got to know my sister. I never got to grow up with her." The courtroom was silent as Nathan continued, his words raw and heartfelt. "Emily didn't get the life she deserved, but I'm here to make sure the people who did this to us and to so many other kids can't do it again." When Nathan finished, he stepped down from the stand, his heart pounding. As he returned to his seat, Rachel reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "You were amazing," she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. Nathan nodded, though his mind was spinning. For the first time in his life, he felt like his voice had mattered. Over the next several days, the trial unfolded with more testimony, documents, and damning evidence presented by the prosecution. Ethan worked closely with the DA, providing insight from his own investigation and helping connect the dots in the agency's tangled web of deceit. Maggie Davis's articles brought the case into the public eye, exposing the scope of the corruption. The community rallied around the victims, offering support and demanding justice. One evening, Nathan sat on the Carter's porch with Ethan, the two of them watching the sun set behind the trees. "Do you think it'll make a difference?" Nathan asked, his voice quiet. Ethan looked at him, his expression thoughtful. "I think it already has. Every time you speak out, every time you share your story, you're showing people that the truth matters. That people matters." Nathan fiddled with the silver pendant around his neck, its weight no longer feeling like a burden, but a reminder of everything he was fighting for. "You really think Emily would be proud?" Nathan asked, his voice cracking slightly. Ethan's smile was soft but unwavering. "I know she would be. She'd be proud of how far you've come, of the strength you've shown." Nathan nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting into a small smile. For the first time, he began to believe it. The final day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed. The jury deliberated for hours before finally returning with a verdict. On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. On the count of endangering minors, guilty. On the count of falsifying records, guilty. With each charge read aloud, Nathan felt a weight lifting from his chest. Justice, long overdue, was finally being served. When the judge announced the sentences, the room erupted in quiet applause. Families who had been affected by the agency's actions hugged one another, tears of relief and joy flowing freely. Ethan pulled Nathan into a tight embrace, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it, Nathan. You helped make this happen." Nathan nodded, his throat too tight to speak. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. That evening, the Carters hosted a small gathering at their home to celebrate the verdict. Friends, neighbors, and supporters filled the backyard, the air alive with laughter and hope. Nathan sat with Rachel on the porch swing, a plate of food balanced on his lap. "You've come a long way, Nathan," Rachel said, her voice warm. Emily would be so proud of the young man you're becoming." Nathan looked at her, his eyes glistening. "I still have a lot to figure out." Rachel smiled, reaching for his hand. "We all do, but you're not alone anymore." As the evening wore on, Nathan picked up Emily's guitar and began to play. The melody was simple, but filled with emotion. Each note a tribute to the sister he never knew but had always felt connected to. The crowd quieted, the music weaving through the air like a thread binding them all together. For Nathan, the song was more than just music. It was a promise to himself and to Emily. A promise to live fully, to honor her memory, and to embrace the family and future he had found. A gentle breeze stirred the air as Nathan stood by Emily's grave, the silver pendant glinting in the sunlight. Beside him, Ethan and Rachel stood quietly, their hands clasped together. A bouquet of white lilies lay against the headstone, its fragrance mingling with the crisp morning air. Nathan knelt down, his fingers brushing the engraved letters of Emily's name. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say a dozen times, but now, standing here, words seemed insufficient. "Hi, Emily," he began softly. "I've been learning about you, about us, and even though we never got to meet, I feel like I've known you my whole life." His voice caught, but he pressed on. "I'm sorry for everything you went through, for everything we both went through. But I promise I'll live a life that honors you. I'll make you proud." Behind him, Rachel wiped a tear from her cheek, her heart aching at the raw sincerity in Nathan's words. Ethan rested a hand on her shoulder, his own emotions visible in his eyes. Nathan stood slowly, letting the moment settle. The warmth of Ethan and Rachel's presence grounded him, a reminder that he wasn't alone. Back at the Carters' home, the atmosphere was lighthearted as they prepared for a barbecue. The backyard buzzed with laughter and conversation, neighbors and friends coming together to celebrate not just the trial's outcome, but Nathan's place in their family. Ethel Green sat in a shaded corner of the yard, a proud smile on her face as she watched Nathan mingle with the guests. "You've done well, child," Ethel said when Nathan brought her a plate of food. Nathan grinned shyly. "Couldn't have done it without you, Miss Ethel." "You've got a good heart," Ethel said, her voice kind but firm. "Use it well." As the evening wore on, Nathan found himself standing by the makeshift stage where Emily's guitar rested. Ethan joined him, his voice low. "Are you going to play something?" Nathan hesitated. "I was thinking about it. But what if I mess up?" Ethan smiled. "It's not about being perfect. It's about sharing your heart. And I think everyone here would love to hear what you have to say." Nathan nodded, his resolve strengthening. He picked up the guitar and stepped onto the small stage. The chatter quieted as he adjusted the microphone and strummed a few tentative chords. "This song is for my sister, Emily," Nathan said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "And for everyone who's ever felt lost but found their way back." The first notes rang out, soft and full of emotion. Nathan's voice joined the melody, weaving a story of resilience, loss, and the hope of finding home. Each word carried the weight of his journey, a testament to the strength he'd discovered within himself. The crowd listened in rapt silence, their expressions reflecting the power of his words. Rachel and Ethan stood arm in arm, their pride and love for Nathan shining through. When the final notes faded into the warm evening air, the crowd erupted in applause. Nathan stepped back, his cheeks flushed but his heart full. "You were amazing," Rachel said, pulling him into a hug as he stepped down. Ethan clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Emily would be proud, Nathan. We all are." Later that night, as the party wound down, Nathan sat with Ethan and Rachel on the porch. The stars sparkled above, and the quiet hum of crickets filled the air. "I never thought I'd have something like this," Nathan admitted, his voice soft. "Like what?" Rachel asked, leaning closer. "A family," Nathan said, glancing at them. "People who care about me. A place to belong." Ethan smiled, his tone steady. "You'll always have that here, Nathan. You're a Carter now, in every way that matters." Nathan looked down at the silver pendant hanging around his neck. It no longer felt like a reminder of what he had lost, but of what he had gained. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with quiet gratitude. Rachel wrapped an arm around him. "We're the ones who are thankful, Nathan. For you. for the chance to have you in our lives." In the days that followed, Nathan began to embrace his new life with growing confidence. He enrolled in community college, taking music and creative writing classes to nurture his passions. He continued to play Emily's guitar, using music as a way to process his emotions and connect with others. Through it all, the Carters stood by his side, cheering him on and reminding him that he was never alone. One afternoon, as Nathan sat on the porch strumming his guitar, a group of neighborhood kids gathered to listen. He smiled at their curious faces and began teaching them simple chords, their laughter filling the air. Rachel watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with pride. Ethan joined her, his voice low. "He's going to be okay." Rachel nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "More than okay. He's going to do great things." As they stood there, watching Nathan share his music and his heart, they knew that the journey they had all taken through loss, pain, and discovery had brought them to a place of healing and hope. Nathan's fingers stilled on the guitar as the kids scattered, their laughter echoing down the street. He looked out at the horizon, a sense of peace settling over him. For the first time in his life, he felt whole, and for the first time, he knew exactly who he was. Nathan set down the guitar, the faint echo of its final chord lingering in the quiet evening air. He glanced at the silver pendant, its smooth surface catching the last rays of sunlight. His journey had been one of loss and discovery, but it had led him to something he never expected: a family, a future, and a sense of belonging he could call his own. As he looked toward the horizon, Nathan smiled. The weight of his past no longer felt like a burden, but a reminder of his resilience and the hope that carried him forward. Thank you for joining us on Nathan's incredible journey. If this story of perseverance, kindness, and hope inspired you, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another heartfelt story. Share this video with someone who needs a little hope today, and let us know in the comments how Nathan's story moved you. See you in the next story, where we'll continue exploring the power of family, resilience, and finding light in even the darkest moments. Stay tuned.